The head of the gang is George Kelly, sometimes known as Machine Gun.
Charles Bronson as Machine Gun Kelly brings shockingly alive the time of as vicious a killer as you've ever known. Susan Cabot as Flo, his girl. As wanton a woman as Kelly is wild. These are the untamed of our world. Killers by instinct.
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
They're gonna kiss me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, doctor, help me!
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're gonna make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first!
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
Welcome to the American International Podcast. My name is Jeff Markin.
I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And we love movies made by American International Pictures. And one of those films is our subject for this week, Machine Gun Kelly from 1958. Machine Gun Kelly was produced and directed by Roger Corman from a screenplay by Wright Campbell.
Machine Gun Kelly stars Charles Bronson as George R. Machine Gun Kelly, Susan Cabot as Florence Flo Becker, Morey Amsterdam as Michael Fanny Fandango, Richard Devon as Apple, Jack Lambert as Howard, Frank DeKova as Harry, Connie Gilchrist as Ma Becker, Wally Campo as Maize, Barbara Morris as Lynn Grayson, Don Menzer as Sherryl Vito, George Archambeault as Frank, Robert Griffin as Mr. Andrew Vito, Michael Fox as Detective Clinton, Larry Thor as Detective Drummond, and Shirley Falls as Martha. Oh, and just in case you tuned to this podcast hoping to hear something about Machine Gun Kelly, the rapper slash boyfriend of Megan Fox, we apologize. That's not what this is about.
I don't apologize.
All right. Well, anyway. So our movie opens with some headlines. They're not actual newspaper headlines. These are just artist rendering of headlines. And they say, daring bank holdup, kidnapped, payroll robbery. And then we go into the credits.
Yeah, this is a really fun credit opening sequence, I think. It's animated.
In black and white, like the movie.
And there's this jazzy music playing.
Very upbeat.
And as names pop up, they get shot down.
That's right.
Bullet holes appear and cover them up. And it's just, it's fun.
Yeah, it lets you know what you're in for in this movie. There's going to be a little gun-related mayhem. It's executive produced by Samuel Arkoff and James Nicholson. We should probably mention that as well. And then we come into the actual movie. It's 1930s. You can tell by the vehicles that are going down the street. And a man walks down said street carrying a case. This man pauses in front of a window for a funeral home. He sees a sign advertising funeral wreaths, and it makes him shudder and turn away. He kind of freaks out when he sees this.
A 1931 black Cadillac sedan comes by, and there are two guys in the car, and they pick him up, and they head to the Lebanon Bank.
Two of the men go in. We only see the foyer here. We don't see what happens inside the bank. And this is done with shadows and sounds. Music is playing. It's the same kind of jazzy music from the intro. We see what looks like the shadow of a guard come up and then get shot down.
And then something is thrown through the glass in the doorway and shatters it, and that triggers the alarm. So the guys run off. They get in the car. They speed off, and they're changing their clothes in the car because they have planned their getaway.
Right. In the back seat is our hero. This is Charles Bronson, a.k.a. Machine Gun Kelly. He's counting the loot from the bank job.
And as they're driving, you see the clothes that they had been wearing are thrown out the window and into the river.
And the gun that they used was also tossed out the window.
They briefly stop, and the guy in the passenger seat is let out.
Machine Gun Kelly gets outside the car. He's standing on the running boards. He tosses the money bag out of the car down a hill where someone is waiting to pick it up. And then Machine Gun Kelly gets dropped off.
And he's picked up by Flo.
So Flo is apparently his girl. They seem to be some kind of an item. She's kind of nagging at him already.
And he's got a case of the giggles.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how their relationship really is. They seem to be together, yet antagonistic towards each other. They drive off, and they get stopped in a roadblock. There's a man and a woman a couple cars ahead of them getting stopped by the cops. The woman says she definitely did see a car with 3 men in it in response to the police inquiry, but her male companion says, oh, no, you didn't. And then they drive off, and the next thing we know, Kelly and Flo are there, and the police are asking them questions.
So George Machine Gun, I'm going to refer to him as George, he cops a little attitude with the cop. He's a little cocky.
He's just sassing them, basically. He asks for Flo's license and wants to look in the trunk. Flo starts flirting with him, and then he says, oh, go look, I don't care. Search us, I don't care. That's basically his attitude. Because he doesn't have anything on him, so there's nothing they can find. He doesn't have a weapon, he doesn't have money, so he's okay with being searched.
And the cop isn't appreciative of his attitude and says that he would take him up on his offer, but they just got a call in that the getaway car has been found, so they have other things to deal with at the moment. So George and Flo are free to go. And they stop at a service station where they get a fill-up of 8 gallons, which costs $1.60.
Oh, man. This is the last service station on the way to Louisville. And it's more than just a service station. There is a little zoo in the back that you can visit with caged wild cats.
It's run by a guy named Harry, who is, in his spare time, a big game hunter, or so he claims.
Right. He has a mountain lion, I think a tiger, that he claims he caught the mountain lion himself, which is, it makes me feel, I feel a little dubious about that claim. When he goes to charge George for the gas, instead of asking for $1.60, though, he asks for $200 and $1.60. He wants his cut because he was part of the job. He arranged for them to get the car.
And he says he's entitled to his cut immediately because he's not a partner in this venture. He's a hired hand.
Yeah, so he shouldn't have to wait for the money to be divvied up. He should get paid up front.
So he and George take a little walk. He's going to introduce George to his mountain lion. And as they're talking, Harry removes the padlock from the lion's cage. Says again that he wants his $200. Now, George is very aware of his mortality and doesn't appreciate the threat.
Right. He's genuinely scared. He throws a couple of $100 bills on the ground.
Tells Harry to pick it up and put the padlock back on. And as soon as that is done, George slaps Harry and pushes him against the lion's cage.
And Harry gets slashed by the lion at this point and goes down.
George tells him he can keep the 2 bills.
And then in revenge against the lion, he takes his drink and spits it at him. Or her. I don't know if it's a boy or a girl lion. So we see another headline. It turns out the bandits got $41,000 when they did the bank job. And remember, that's 1931 money.
So now Flo, George, and Howard are in, I guess, their current hideout. It looks like it's a small room.
It's their lair. Howard is the guy from the bank job. He was in the front seat. Not the driver, but the other guy.
And George is demonstrating how he can assemble a Tommy gun in 2 minutes and 38 seconds.
Add 42 seconds if you want him to do it blindfolded.
There's a knock on the door. It's Michael Fandango, played by Morey Amsterdam.
And he has brought the money. So I guess he was the guy at the bottom of the hill who collected the loot.
They look in the bag and they accuse him of dipping in and taking his share. So they're not going to give him what was supposed to be his share because the loot bag seems a little light. And then further repercussions for him. Fandango is roughed up a little bit and Flo throws a drink in his face. So now we're at the police station. And we can kind of get a quick update about how the investigation of this bank job is going.
Yeah, the bank manager's there looking at mugshots. And for some reason, the mugshot books are all sorted by the weapons that are used. So they haven't shown the bank manager the book of criminals who use machine guns, but they do pull that out next.
So we're back in the lair. And it's revealed that George is afraid of death symbols. Now, we've already seen a little bit of this because he reacted unfavorably at the funeral parlor earlier in the film.
Yeah, and he was afraid of the lion. He was afraid of being mauled by a lion. So, I mean, that's natural. Anybody would be. But he was really squirrely. Flo's not here now. It's just Howard and George. And Howard's giving him a hard time for being a fraidy cat.
Guns are pulled and threats are made. But then Flo comes in. So it's down to business. So they start making a new plan for another bank job.
They need 2 drivers for this one.
So they get Fandango to drive.
So Maize in one car and Fandango in another.
And Fandango's game to do this because he's looking for a way to get even for being ripped off in the previous job.
Right. This job is a payroll robbery. So they're going to, in between the time when an armored car delivers cash for payroll for some business and the time that the payroll company comes to pick up the cash, is 3 minutes, and that's the time in which they have to do this job. So everyone is to meet at Harry's service station on the day of the job. George wants to meet Fandango at Harry's gas station, trying to ask him for help and I think arrange the car that they're going to be driving. But George also wants to make sure that Fanny knows not to try any funny stuff in this job.
So to prove his point, he throws Fanny against the lion's cage, and the mountain lion gets to maul another victim.
We don't see it. Fanny just drops to the ground, but we do find out later what happened. So I don't think he's going to be doing any driving anytime soon. Let's just say that.
So back at the room, the plans are being finalized for this robbery.
We find out who does what over the course of the robbery. Howard's going to be inside the bank. He's going to be the one that actually takes the cash. Kelly is outside, I guess, just standing guard. Flo is going to be somewhere down the road, blocking the truck from getting there too soon by pretending to have car trouble. And then Maize will be the driver.
So the next day, everyone gets into their positions. George is dropped off down the street. Howard goes into the bank. Maize parks nearby, and Flo stops her car and opens the hood in her position.
It pretends to look like a helpless damsel in distress.
So inside the bank, Howard is just skulking around, pretending to sign checks and just waiting for them to open the vault.
I think he hides behind a plant as they're opening the vault, so he sees it happen, and they don't see him.
And just according to plan, the drivers of the payroll truck stop to help Flo with her car. So Maize drives up to the bank in his position. George starts walking toward the bank, but he stops when he sees 2 guys carrying a coffin.
He goes berserk. So he's no use now. Inside the bank, Howard gets made by the cops, and he starts shooting, and they start shooting.
He gets in the car. Maize takes off.
By now, they're being pursued by the payroll truck drivers. And they're shooting as well.
They're still shooting and being shot at. Maize takes a hit. The car crashes. Howard gets out and flees on foot.
I guess at some point, Flo picked up George, because the next thing we see is them walking into her parents' house. And boy, her mom is a piece of work. She does not like George.
She's an interesting individual. She doesn't like George because she thinks he's a failure as a criminal.
Right. Yeah, my daughter could do so much better.
And the fact that there was just this flubbed robbery attempt making the papers isn't doing him any favors in her eyes.
Right. And we learned that she's a criminal of a sort as well. She's a madam, and her home is a brothel. One of the workers there asks if Flo is the new girl, and Ma says, nope, she's my daughter. Flo calls down her dad, who comes down. He's a lot nicer than his wife. He actually gives his condolences to George over the death of Maize. So he's a much nicer guy than... He's probably the nicest guy in this whole movie, to be honest.
So while Flo's mom still is making fun of him for having served time for running booze during Prohibition...
She's really holding a grudge. That was ages ago.
Her dad offers him a drink, but when he hands it to him, George's a little freaked out because there's a skull and crossbones tattooed on his hand.
I feel like this is going a little too far.
Yeah, there's fear of death, and then there's
harmless symbolism causing a gross overreaction.
So next scene, we see Flo sitting at a booth at a restaurant of some sort, and the character comes up who wants to talk to her about Michael Fandango. And he's there basically for exposition on everything that's been going on with the characters that we saw earlier but haven't seen since the bungled robbery.
He says he knows all about George and Howard and Maize, that Howard wants revenge on Kelly and will kill him if he sees him. And this is where we find out what happened to Fandango. The lion ripped off his arm.
And he advises that George stay out of the bank robbing business.
At this point, though, George has achieved the high honor of being public enemy number 1.
And he seems to be enjoying his stay at the brothel. He's in a room where a bunch of the ladies are entertaining. One is playing the piano, and another is learning how to shoot a Tommy gun.
Well, George is doing a pantomime of how you shoot it, and he includes sound effects. And at this point, I thought he sounded a lot like Elmer Fudd, if Elmer Fudd was showing someone how a Tommy gun worked. But the girl is suitably impressed, and she and George snog for a bit. Then she offers to dance for him.
And this is when Flo returns.
Flo is not pleased by this turn of events.
No, she pushes this woman down.
She almost scalps her, grabs her by the hair and shoves her down.
And then when George calls her mother an old lady, Flo slaps him. She tells him that Howard wants to kill him. She's giving all this information that she just got from the restaurant she was visiting. And everyone leaves the room except for Flo and George. And it's revealed now publicly between the two of them that George was the one who bungled the robbery because he didn't show up when he was supposed to.
Right, the coffin thing, his fear of death impaired his ability to be a good bank robber. Flo's going to find out where Howard is so that they can get the drop on him before, I guess, he gets the drop on them.
Yeah, since Howard is out for revenge, it's important that George take care of him and his whole gang before they find George.
Right. Flo's mom comes back with another chance to nag at George for being a failure. She calls him yellow. So I guess after they do all this, George now has something to prove. So he finds out where Howard is, and he goes there.
He gets his Tommy gun, and Flo drives him to where Howard is located. He opens the door, and there's a whole group of men playing cards, and he just guns them all down.
Howard is the last to be gunned down. He gets a few extra bullets for his trouble.
And as they drive off, George says that banks are small time. They're going to go into something bigger. The new plan is kidnapping.
Uh-oh.
So 2 weeks or so later, Flo and George are skulking outside a school, waiting for their mark.
Yeah, they picked one little girl in particular.
And Flo has been trailing her for weeks, so she knows this little girl's schedule. It seems all the kids have left, so they're wondering,
did they miss her?
But then one more girl emerges from the school, and this is the one they're looking for.
Her name is Cheryl. It's spelled differently than mine, though.
So as she walks by the car, George greets her in a very creepy way.
There's no way to not be creepy in this situation. Leave little schoolgirls alone, people.
He says her parents sent him to pick her up.
She's very skeptical at this because she has a nurse coming to pick her up.
And here she comes down the street now.
Yep, this is Barbara Morris as Lynn Grayson, the nurse.
So a quick consultation between George and Flo, and they decide that they'll just have to take the nurse as well. The reason for this is because the ransom note's already on its way, so if they just try to do this another day...
Yeah, they can't change plans now. So I guess they worked too far in advance for this job. So George gets out of the car and kind of hustles Sherryl inside. And then, obviously, when Lynn sees this, she runs towards the car, and they have a gun, and they tell her to get in as well.
So they all snuggle up in the front seat and take off. They're not going too far before it's time to switch cars again. So George and little Sherryl and Nurse Lynn get out and get to another car with a new character who is Apple.
He must have replaced Maize in our plant named gangster collection here.
So now we're back at George's lair. Lynn is given limited access to the area. She's allowed to come to the common area, I guess, just as long as when they send her to her room, she goes to her room.
We hear some exposition radio playing in the background. The kidnapping has obviously been reported to police, and the police actually suspect Lynn because she had just started in this job the day before. So they think it was an inside job.
Lynn asks to take Sherryl to their room, and as she leaves, another news bulletin comes on saying that a ransom note has been received. And this is when Flo's parents stop by.
They brought some food for the little girl.
And a creepy doll.
Yeah, that will make everything better for this poor little girl.
Yeah, Sherryl seems very happy with it. It's kind of a jester. It's got a long pointed hat and extended arms and legs, but she seems quite thrilled with it.
She's just happy it's not a clown.
Lynn tells Sherryl to thank Mom for the baby doll. And then Lynn asks if she would help them. But Flo's mom says that she can't do that and kind of chides Lynn for asking for help in the first place. So in the other room, there's another news bulletin. And they say that the ransom note has been released to the press. And we find out that the ransom is the amount of $100,000.
Nurse Lynn has come back to the common area where Apple is sitting there looking at her like a predator. He starts hitting on her, gets aggressive.
Yeah, George has fallen asleep in his chair, so Apple's free to do as he pleases without prying eyes.
Right. He thinks she needs a big man.
So he tells her to put Sherryl to bed so that the two of them could be alone. But this is when George wakes up and immediately points his gun at Apple and tells him maybe he should go outside and take a look around. And then Lynn thanks George for his help.
So we get another real-time update about the ransom note from the radio announcer. Cheryl's dad didn't catch the phone number for the ransom. I guess they had called to give further instructions beyond what was in the note. And whatever number they gave him, he didn't make out. So he needs them to call back and repeat the number so that Cheryl's dad can go through with fulfilling the demands of the ransom note.
Cheryl gets a little excited because she recognizes her father's voice, but nobody else is excited because this wasn't part of the plan.
It seems suspicious. It could be a trap. But if they want their money, they have no choice but to acquiesce to this request.
Flo returns. She says she's heard on the radio what's going on, so she's up to speed. And George wants her to go back to the store and make the call again ASAP. She doesn't want to do this because she feels it can wait. There's no rush.
And it could be a trap.
I believe it was Fandango who had made the previous call. And in her eyes, they could just wait till he's available and send him to do it again. But George is insistent and sends her out to make the call. So now we're in the general store.
Yeah, they don't have a phone at their place. It's the 30s. There aren't phones everywhere. But there is a phone at this store, and it's very public.
There's a policeman sitting there as Flo enters. So she goes through the pretense of returning cigarettes because she apparently bought the wrong brand. Her husband likes Camels.
So she asks for a carton of Camels and, what about a sack of flour so I can make some bread?
The radio is on in the store, and this news bulletin says that they're still asking for the kidnappers to make that call again, and that they will repeat that bulletin every 15 minutes.
This was on before Flo came in. The shopkeeper said at that point that hanging was too good for the kidnappers. And then later when Flo comes in and hears the announcement that the next time it came on, she echoes that sentiment exactly. She says that hanging's too good for them. And the shopkeeper is like, oh, that's what I said. Now the cop wants to know what Flo's story is. And she makes up a tale about being there with her husband. Her husband's a writer, and they're going to be there for a few days.
So the cop goes outside to check on her car and see if he can find any holes in her story.
And that gives her a chance to make the phone call.
Outside, the cop sees a newspaper article about the Louisville robbery.
From the Louisville paper.
And also notes that the car has New York plates.
Yeah, that pings his radar a little bit. It's a little suspicious.
Because if they had come from New York, why would they hit Louisville before going up to wherever they are, the near Youngstown, I think.
Yeah. This is when Flo comes out of the store carrying nothing. She has no bags. She has no cigarettes. She has no sack of flour. But she gets in the car, and the cop wants to talk to her a little bit more before she leaves. After the cop basically just tells her to be careful out there, he goes back in the store, makes a phone call to find out what call was just made from that location. And they find out it was a call to Youngstown, and they get the bar that Flo made a call to. I guess she's calling Frank, who's the person relaying the ransom information to Cheryl's father.
So then Flo returns to George and the others and lets them know about the chatty cops. So they're all a little concerned about this. So what they decide to do is to pack up and clear out because the cop knows where they're staying.
Right, and we know this because we are back with the police. And they're putting 1 + 1 + 1 together here. The state cop who looked at Flo's car has reported in at seeing the Louisville paper.
And they just decide that maybe this has something to do with that Louisville robbery and that botched robbery from a few weeks back.
In Elizabethtown. So they're thinking that once they figure out who's behind all three of these, it's all the same person.
So now we're at the new hideout, which is Harry's service station.
Yeah, he's got a spare room too.
George and Cheryl are playing patty cake.
And we find out that the ransom information that Frank was supposed to relay did actually get to Cheryl's dad. So now it's time for the next phase of the operation.
But everyone's getting a little antsy, and they're bickering amongst themselves.
Yeah, Flo is mad because George keeps messing everything up because of his crazy fear of death. And she really gives him a shaming here.
She's really writing him about it, and he's not going to take that. And she goes as far as to tell him that she's been using him this whole time, building him up. And after this job, she was going to leave him, assuming that he even survived.
Right, and he never was going to get any of that money.
George doesn't like hearing this, so he slaps her.
And Apple is there.
Apple comes to her rescue.
But he doesn't like seeing that. And he punches Kelly.
And then offers to be Flo's new guy.
Right. Little Cheryl's crying, and Nurse Lynn has to go scoop her up and protect her.
Flo's game to take Apple on because at the moment she can use allies. Harry picks up George and says he feels sorry for him.
Yeah, Harry's there too.
Says he's never seen anybody look the way he did when she told him about himself.
George doesn't like that. He pushes back at Harry.
Which gives Apple another excuse to go back after George.
But George pulls a machine gun that was just sitting right next to him up and tells Apple he's going to peel and core him as he holds the gun on him.
Guns are drawn.
And he does indeed shoot him. He doesn't peel and core him, but Apple's dead. And there's a weird cutaway to the lion roaring outside as this happens.
I think it kind of implies that Apple will now be Mountain Lion Chow.
Oh, right, because he drags his body out right after that. And what better way to dispose of it than to let it feed the lions?
So George goes to call up Fandango, who we now see is missing his left arm.
He's wearing a trench coat with the arm pinned up, so we don't see anything gross like a stump or anything.
He asks him to make a decision about which he likes better, money or revenge. Fandango says it's money and that he's not mad anymore, but he lost an arm, so I find that a little hard to believe.
Yeah, it's not a very convincing performance. It's almost verging on sarcasm. Oh, I'm not mad at all.
And as Fandango heads out, the police stop him and take him to the police station for further questioning. They ask him who was calling him. He gives them some excuse and says to go check on it if they don't believe him, and they assure him that they will.
I think it was a fake name.
And then they kind of just let him go, but their plan is to trail him.
It's not necessary, though, because just a few minutes later, he calls them and tells them everything that they want to know.
Yep, he says they're dealing with Machine Gun Kelly, and he'll be calling later with more information.
And they had kind of, like, they don't know who's calling. Morey Amsterdam has an extremely distinctive voice, and it could not be anyone else.
So up to this point, Harry has been just a hired hand in these dealings, but George is offering to make Harry a full partner.
Yeah, due to a manpower shortage caused by him killing people, there's an opening in the business.
He also says they're going to settle for $50,000 instead of $100,000 because he is at a point now where he just wants this deal to be done and wants to get out of there because things are starting to get a little hot.
Right. So the original deal was to get $50,000 and then get another $50,000 when they return the girl. So the new plan is to not return the girl. They're just going to kill her and also nurse Lynn. And we should mention that part of Harry's promotion involves him following Fandango because George doesn't trust him to deliver the money without any incident.
So Cheryl's father is preparing to deliver the ransom. He's at the police station and wants to make sure that they're not going to try anything while he's doing this because he doesn't want his daughter to be harmed.
Right. He doesn't care about the money. He just wants his little girl back.
The police assure him that they won't make a move until they're sure little Sherryl is safe. So he goes to drop off the money.
Yeah. Cheryl's dad takes the brick of cash. It's like a wrapped parcel of cash. Goes to a park. It's nighttime. He finds a trash can and he puts the parcel full of cash inside that can.
And Fandango goes to pick it up. And while he's doing this, we see Harry watching him from the bushes.
Harry's following him now. Fandango goes to make a phone call.
He's going to call the police to tell them where they're meeting.
At a gas station on the highway.
And this is when Harry comes out of hiding and says he's going to take Fandango to the new meeting place because they didn't trust him.
Right, and Fandango seems okay with this. He's saying that it's fine. You can even hold the cash if you want.
But he can't because, like Fandango, Harry only has one good arm and it's holding a gun at the moment.
Right. They're quite a pair, the two of them.
So as they get there, George is waking up from a nightmare. He starts screaming and shooting in his bed.
He dreamt that he was in a coffin, he says, and that Flo is the one who put him there.
Almost immediately, the police are at this location.
Yeah, if it's a different location, how did they find it since Fandango didn't know? Is a question that will never be answered.
They want to know how the police found them, and Fandango was quick to tell them that he told them.
Yeah, but obviously, it was supposed to be a different location than Fandango was aware of, and yet it wasn't. So
he starts gloating about this and about how he got his revenge, so Harry shoots him.
Yeah.
And Harry starts laughing maniacally and goes to the window because this is apparently the best time he's ever had. He goes to the window and starts shooting at the police.
They shoot back.
They shoot back once and take him out. Now, George is scared because they've got a sniper out there, and George does not want to die. Flo yells out the window, and the police ask if that's Florence and lets her know that they have her parents in custody.
Yeah, they're going to charge them as accessories. This doesn't really trouble Flo too much. She's ready to go out guns a-blazing.
They do offer her a deal if she surrenders that they'll give her a recommendation to the courts. And this sounds okay to George because he's ready to surrender right now. He does not want to die. He doesn't want anybody else to die.
Yeah, he says he doesn't want his guts to be spilled out all over.
But she's not going to play that way. She's going to fight to the end.
She thinks that she can get a deal from the cops if they do arrest her, and she'll say that it was all George's idea and she had no choice but to go along with what he said because she was afraid of him when it's really the opposite.
And George says that he didn't want any of this, and it's all her fault. So he punches her in the throat.
Yep, and down she goes.
And then the cops burst in, which seems to me to be a little unprofessional.
Right. How do they know what was going on inside? They have no way of knowing what they were going to walk into.
It was a little risky, I think, but it worked in their favor. They take Lynn and Cheryl out.
Yep, they're safe. Thank goodness.
They check out Flo's body on the ground. She seems to be alive, but not doing well.
They pick her up. She's under arrest. And then they poke a little fun at Machine Gun Kelly.
They ask why he didn't go out guns a-blazing, and he says, because I knew you'd kill me.
And then they basically think that's really pathetic because they call him Pop Gun Kelly after that as they arrest him.
And that's the end of the film. Welcome back to the American International Podcast, where we're talking about Machine Gun Kelly from 1958, produced and directed by Roger Corman.
AIP had asked Corman for a crime film, and he decided to pull a story from the headlines. It had worked for him in the past. He hired a screenwriter named R. Wright Campbell, also known as Robert or Bobby. And Corman says he wrote a very good script with strong, well-sketched characters, based a great deal on the facts. He hired him based on his previous work, which included Five Guns West. And one of the things that drew Corman to this story was the fact that Kelly did meekly give up. He thought that made him a more complicated character, a weak, self-loathing man who masked his fears of social and sexual inadequacy with a gun-wielding bravado and acts of violence.
I think that brings up a good point, but he might have overdone it a little bit in the execution here.
Yeah, definitely. When we get to the review, I think that'll come up again. It will for me.
So because this is a Roger Corman film, a lot of this cast would go on to work with him in several other productions. Well, not for Roger Corman, Charles Bronson would appear in AIP's Master of the World and Lola. Susan Cabot was previously in Sorority Girl and Viking Women and the Sea Serpent, the saga therein of whatever that long title is.
As was Barbara Morris. And she would also appear in A Bucket of Blood, The Haunted Palace, The Trip, Wild Angels, and The Dunwich Horror.
Morey Amsterdam would appear in Beach Party and Muscle Beach Party. Richard Devon appeared in The Undead, Blood of Dracula, and The Viking Women.
Frank DeKova would go on to appear in Teenage Caveman and as a voice, I guess, in Heavy Traffic. And Wally Campo later appeared in Hell Squad, Tank Commando, Master of the World, Tales of Terror, and Devil's Angels.
Robert Griffin had previously appeared in I Was a Teenage Werewolf. And of course, Larry Thor we saw in Fast and the Furious as Detective Sergeant. He appeared in Five Guns West, and we saw him get impaled by a giant syringe in The Amazing Colossal Man.
What a fun way to go.
Interestingly, this movie had originally cast Dick Miller in the title role. The writer, our Wright Campbell, wasn't pleased with his casting and started campaigning for his brother, William Campbell, to play the part.
Well, he started pressuring Corman, Arkoff, and Nicholson for this, and they got tired of it.
So Dick Miller's contract was just bought out, and instead of appeasing to the writer, they found some other potential people to play the part. And of the three, Charles Bronson was the one that Corman picked.
Dick Miller didn't find out what happened until years later. He stopped by Nicholson's office to drop off some scripts and found out what had gone down. Campbell was sending telegrams and calling AIP to say that Miller was all wrong for the role. And that's what led to Miller getting ejected from the production. And Miller's quoted as saying, "I walked away from a lot of parts, but this one walked away from me, and I really wanted it. I think it would have done for me the same thing that it did for Charlie."
Now, I'd be interested to see Machine Gun Kelly with Dick Miller in the role. It's difficult for me to imagine, actually.
Well, it's actually easier for me to imagine Dick Miller as a scaredy cat gangster than it is for me to imagine Charles Bronson as a scaredy cat gangster. So I think he could have made it work. I don't think we would have been questioning why Dick Miller was cast, had he been cast, and then asking why didn't they pick someone like Charles Bronson.
Oh, that is true. And I would love the opportunity to see more Dick Miller lead roles.
Oh, of course. He only had 3 in his entire career. That's crazy. Corman says he shot the film in 10 days for $60,000. And he describes working with Bronson, saying that Bronson showed more swagger than weakness on set. And he went on in his autobiography to talk about an incident where he somehow managed up sparring with Bronson and getting pummeled by him, and only finding out afterwards that Bronson was a semi-pro boxer before he went into acting.
Susan Cabot referred to the film as the most satisfactory of the 6 movies she made with Corman, in part because of the fun thing going on between her character and Bronson's and the strength of the relationship she had with Bronson. But according to Arkoff, Bronson wasn't happy with Cabot being cast because she didn't resemble Kelly's real-life girlfriend, who was a big blonde woman. Bronson had said he couldn't easily suspend his disbelief, but he would just try to adjust because that's what you have to do as an actor.
It's funny how antagonistic their characters were in the movie, though. She's always taunting him. She takes credit for everything that he did do right. She says, "I gave you the machine gun, the name, the reputation, a backbone." And she constantly poking at him to make him more violent than he otherwise would be, even when it means she herself gets punched.
So looking at that from the perspective of an actor, I could see why that would be a very attractive part to play.
Oh, yeah, for her, definitely. I'm sure that any woman would be tired of playing damsels in distress and girlfriends and just people with no character whatsoever. So this must have been enormous fun for her. She got to eat a lot of scenery. The tagline for this movie was, "Without his gun, he was naked yellow." So they're always making fun of how much of a chicken he is. And this movie was released as a double feature with the Bonnie Parker story. And Nicholson and Arkoff said this was their favorite double feature to date. And Variety called it one of the best exploitation duos of the year.
At $60,000, the film was considered low budget, but it received good critical reviews. It was the first lead role for actor Charles Bronson, and he received $5,000 for this part. Corman called it a major turning point in his career because this was the film with which he began to get serious critical attention.
He especially got attention in Europe. This led to his work being examined in such journals as Cahiers du Cinéma, and as Corman says in his book, to the French critics, the film expressed themes. I was making a statement. There was significance in certain moments, and the film had a visual style expressed through the camera. All that was in italics. But back in America, Arkoff found his films getting unwanted attention from none other than J. Edgar Hoover. And Arkoff wasn't too happy about that.
Arkoff was quoted as saying, if he really wants to get to the source of much of the violence seen by young people, why doesn't he go into people's living rooms? Why doesn't he look at what they're watching on TV? That's where Americans see a lot of violence.
Yeah, his films passed the production code, so the Feds should have nothing to complain about in anything that they saw on screen. I don't know, what was so violent about TV back in the late 50s?
There's a lot of Westerns.
Oh, okay. I was thinking Leave It to Beaver, and there's no bloodshed in that. The opening credits tells us that the title character upon which this story is based is true. The other characters, all events and firms depicted are fictional. Any similarity to actual persons living or dead is purely coincidental. But the truth is that they actually played fast and loose with the true story of Machine Gun Kelly. For one thing, the kidnapping that is portrayed here is of a little girl, when in reality, they kidnapped Oklahoma oilman and millionaire Charles F. Urschel, for which a $200,000 ransom was paid, and that's what resulted in Kelly's eventual capture. And Machine Gun Kelly himself was Machine Gun Kelly in name only. He never killed anyone with that gun.
And when he was eventually captured, it wasn't in a shootout with lawmen, as shown in this film, but police and FBI agents in Memphis, Tennessee surprised him in the stairwell of a boarding house. And he fell to his knees and screamed, "Don't shoot, G-men!" and actually coined that phrase, G-men, by which FBI agents have been known ever since.
Wow, I had no idea. The character of Flo was based on George Kelly's second wife, Catherine Thorne, who was also known as Cleo Brooks. She was just as ambitious in real life as she was portrayed in the film, although she was a lot blonder.
And according to Arkoff's biography, Flying Through Hollywood by the Seat of My Pants, back in 1991, his company was planning to produce a remake of the movie with a $20 million budget, but unfortunately, that never came to pass.
Wow, I think it would have been great. I can't imagine who they would have cast as Machine Gun Kelly, but I would have liked to have seen that.
In 1991?
George Clooney.
No, George Clooney wasn't anybody yet. Patrick Swayze.
No. Well, if you have a great idea as to who should have been cast as Machine Gun Kelly in 1991, let us know on our social media. All right, Jeff, now we come to the portion of this program where we give our reviews of the movie we just watched based on our AIP scale, where A is awesome, I is intermediate, and P is pathetic. How would you grade Machine Gun Kelly?
Well, I had never seen this film before this week, and I really enjoyed it. I was smiling at the very beginning through the opening credits when that jazzy music was playing in the animation, and I enjoyed the film from beginning to end. I do have some issues with some of the death totems and their effect on the main character. I think it's a little extreme and a little over the top. I get that they were trying to get this idea across. I just think they may have been able to find a more subtle way to do it.
It was incredibly unsubtle.
And it takes the legend of Machine Gun Kelly, who in this day and age, people don't know probably much more than just a name, and turns it inside out because he's portrayed as kind of an incompetent coward. And that isn't what you would think, because this guy has legendary, even though we don't know what for, because nobody remembers. They just know he was a criminal.
Right. And the name is cool.
And he's got a cool name, so cool that people are still using it today, whether they deserve it or not.
I think if they did remake this movie today, they would totally scrap the real story, and they would make it a standard gangster film with a competent, brave, dastardly criminal rather than a mousy, afraid of his own shadow kind of mobster.
I'm sure that's what they would do. So this is a difficult movie for me to grade because I really, really liked it, but it's very much a B movie, as AIP was producing B movies at this time. That's all they did. They just doubled them up so that they could theoretically have an A picture. So of the two, Bonnie Parker Story and this would have been the A, but it's a B movie.
Definitely.
I'm going to go ahead and give it the A for awesome. I may be putting too much praise on it, but I just think it's a fun story. I think the characters are all interesting. I think because I wasn't expecting Machine Gun Kelly to be the character that he was, tearing apart the legend that I admit that I'm not really familiar with to begin with, but was built up in my head as being something totally different than what this film portrayed. I hope I'm explaining that well.
There's the contrast.
Yeah, it was a contrast. And the performances are all good. I think the cast is great. As much as I'd like to see Dick Miller in this role, I think Charles Bronson was fine casting as his first major role. I have admittedly not seen a lot of Charles Bronson. I've never seen Death Wish, any of them. I thought him playing a tough guy who deep inside just wasn't a tough guy was interesting to see. So I'm giving this an A for awesome. Cheryl?
I'm going to give it an A as well. And for a lot of the same reasons, but mostly because of Susan Cabot. Her character was who Machine Gun Kelly should have been. Completely ruthless. A hardened criminal. Only because she was a woman, she couldn't do it all herself. She needed a man, and she found someone who she could mold into the sort of macho criminal that she needed to have by her side. So she was really made to be in charge, but she could only be a mall because, she's a woman and it's the 30s. But her character was electric. When she's on screen, you hate her, but also you can't look away. She's straight up evil, and I love it. I love watching her. And I did like the contrast, and like you said, the heavy-handed symbolism of Machine Gun Kelly being afraid of death. I think that in a modern remake, that would be portrayed in a much more understated fashion than what we got here. But it's a good concept. I like that. I like a gangster who's not full-on evil. And I think that it's a really good story. Yes, Dick Miller would have been, I think, better for this than Charles Bronson. I did see Death Wish, and a few other Charles Bronson movies. And so I just can't picture him as someone with any kind of weakness. He's just the stoic, tough guy. So it was a revelation seeing him here in this basically first major role for him, playing someone who's a straight-up chicken. And I enjoyed that contrast. So I'm going to give the movie an A as well. I think it's a great piece of cinema. It's good to watch. You'll enjoy yourself. I won't give it the same praise that the French critics gave Roger Corman, but I think it's a good watch.
So that wraps up this episode of the American International Podcast. I'm Jeff Markin.
And I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And we'll meet you at the drive-in. Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.